at Decision Lens. We actually are the largest, at last check, the largest public sector only focused SaaS company in the world.
I believe that. I mean, you guys were doing defense tech before defense tech was fetch.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is All Quiet on the Second Front, podcast where boring conversations around defense tech and national security come to die. Join me, Tyler Sweat, and my Second Front homies as we dismantle the mundane and cut through the bureaucratic bullshit to demystify the world of defense tech. But be warned, this is not a typical government podcast. You ready to get weird?
All right, gang. Welcome to another episode of All Quiet on the Second Front, where boring defense talk comes to die. Super excited for today's conversation. I have Ted Reynolds here, Chief Revenue Officer at Decision Lens, longtime customer, partner, and friend of the Second Front family, and just really excited to have a fellow revenue leader here on the podcast. So welcome, Ted.
Yeah, thanks, TJ. Excited for the conversation.
So just to get started, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, about Decision Lens, what you guys are working on. I think you've been there for nine years?
Nine years. Yeah, apparently I like to stay at companies a long time. But so currently the Chief Revenue Officer at Decision Lens, and been in this industry in some shape or form for going on 25 years or so. So getting a little long in the tooth here. But I started in the dot-com boom as a programmer, helping build systems for Fortune 500 and government agencies, and migrated over to the sales side after I got sick and tired of looking at computer screens for 17 hours.
Came to the dark side.
Yeah,
yes.
Came to the dark side. Worked for a number of other software companies, and with a number of different hats, ranging from SE to management consultant, and then carried a bag. And it was at that point that I really started to fall in love with sales. And how I would describe it is it was sort of like you're a private detective, and you have to sort of connect the dots, and you got some information, but you don't have all the information. And that was totally different than the career that I had come from, right? So I really got I really started loving sales and the dark side, as you call it. But then I got into sales management, and then I realized that I could help people at scale and sales leadership. Managed the public sector business for a company based out of Austin for 10 years, and that was when I got to really understand how to do business with the federal government, which is a sport in it of itself. And then that company got acquired, and I came over to Decision Lens, and had a variety of different roles here, including carrying a bag and sales management leadership up until my current role as CRO.
That's fantastic. I mean, how many revenue leaders can you find in this space or in commercial markets where 2 decades span really just 2 companies? Like, that is a fantastic just resume check on a sales leader, and probably a bit of a unicorn.
Yeah, perhaps a little long in the tooth for some. But no, I think, and actually I skipped over a couple gigs, but yeah, so it's been effectively 2 close to decade-long stints.
That's amazing.
And working across commercial and federal, and it's just amazing to be able to juxtapose how you sell in commercial versus how you sell in federal. And it's no surprise that there's a lot of commercial organizations out there that try and sell in Fed, and they think they can apply that same approach. And there's a lot of companies that go out of business trying that.
Yes.
And there's others that just throw in the towel pretty quickly because they don't have the kind of patience and or the information that they need in order to get in and sustain their business in Fed.
Yeah, what's the saying? Don't be the first guy in Fed for the sales side.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably don't be the second, but the third is usually the right spot.
That's right. Yeah.
So, Fed public sector sales experience, really dual use sales experience, before that became kind of in vogue, and then you've got Decision Lens, founded in 2002, I believe.
2002 was when the company was incorporated, and then when they came out with their first product, it was about 2006. So we're sort of a unicorn at Decision Lens. We actually are the largest, at last check, the largest public sector only focused SaaS company in the world.
I believe that. I mean, you guys were doing defense tech before defense tech was fetch.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really, I think I was fortunate when I came on to Decision Lens that the company had sort of learned all the lessons of what are the table stakes to do business with the government. In 2013-14, they had to make a big investment in getting their FedRAMP certification, which was table stakes to do business. I mean, contract officers were asking the question, do you have FedRAMP certification? And if you didn't, they didn't want to talk to you, right? And so they did a lot of that stuff. I would say they're pioneers as a software company in Fed in trying to figure out what is the right recipe in order to prime the pump and then get a sustainable business path forward. So
yeah, and I mean, you guys also kind of went through the cloud migration process at the same time that policy was kind of catching up to that adoption in 2014, 2015.
That's right.
We started working together in 2021, I believe, on the department side. So yeah, can you talk through a little bit of what that looked like as you came into Decision Lens? Early days for you, but not necessarily early days for the company. How did it kind of evolve through that process? Were you hiring sales folks against some of those initiatives, or how did you guys kind of grow through that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we had the FedRAMP certification. Again, that was sort of the table stakes to do business. We had, hosting. We had contract vehicles, and that seemed to be answering the mail for the most part for us. And then, in 19 and 20, SolarWinds happened, right? And we had to re-platform because we were around since 2006. We had to re-platform our technology. And it allowed us to introduce new capabilities to different markets. One of those markets was financial management, and with financial data, they had a need for higher levels of security with that data and in our system. And so you had people tightening the screws on security, and you had a new set of customers that we were introduced to that really forced us to have more capabilities as it related to deployment and so forth. And so we were fortunate enough at that time. I feel like you guys were an angel coming out of the sky because we were in a bit of an existential point in our evolution, because we had customers that saw these capabilities, they wanted them, but they couldn't use them. And we had prospects that were asking these questions in terms of, hey, do you have this level of security? And our options at the time were we could pay a 3PAO to get us FedRAMP high. We could go to DISA and try and get an ATO through
PA
DISA
route. Yep.
Yeah, and all of those options were very suboptimal. They cost a lot. We didn't have sponsors that were willing to push us through.
Yeah, your customers don't want to go through that process either.
Customers don't want to go through that process. So, and then fortunately, we had a DoD customer that was privy to the work that you guys were doing, and all the backstory before then of the work that Enrique and others were doing in the Air Force, seeing this problem that was materializing in the sense that government wanted to lock down their networks, but yet as part of that process, it was making it less accessible to the private sector for cutting edge technology to be used. And so when we found you guys and you told us that you had this capability to be able to host our software at a higher level of security and then have a continuous ATO, so it was less burden on the customer and us, it seemed too good to be true.
Yeah.
Right. And we jumped on with you, and of course we were taking a risk with you guys. You were taking a risk with us as your first customer, and as they say, the rest is history. And now we've got 15 or so customers leveraging your capability, and as new ones come on, they're needing these higher levels of security, and this is the easy button for them and us.
Yeah. I mean, there's no shortage of barriers to entry or barriers to scale for software companies in this market. And when I look at the market, we kind of put them into like three large buckets, and we call it like federal civilian as one bucket, DoD is one bucket, and the intelligence community is another. And we're looking at that from the lens of network compliance regime, security. How do we deliver software to those? You guys were in a position where you had a strong product, you had demand from the customer, you had contracting, you had funding, and this was still a barrier to entry to delivery. So talk a little bit about, I think, either broader or pretty tactical, the challenges of doing business in this market as a software company, particularly as a SaaS company, that you're actually trying to follow a commercial SaaS model of build once, deploy and sell many, centralized hosting, great margins, but that kind of starts to break down once you're delivering across all these different agencies and customers.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it goes back to the table stakes. I think folks are surprised when they might hire an initial sales guy to go and investigate the market, and the sales guy comes back and says, "Guys, Houston, there's a problem here," and that problem is how do we get access to those customers? So the contract vehicle comes into play, right?
Yep.
How are we going to get access to those customers?
They want to buy it. Can they buy it?
And getting a contract vehicle to do it, there's certain sort of emerging tech type contract vehicles, whether they're OTAs or others, that early stage technology companies can get access to, but they're still cumbersome and they're not use many, so they're one-offs.
Yep.
So
those are not built for scale.
They're not built for scale.
Yeah.
So I think I think the way that I would describe it is there's the phase of which you're trying to get the pump primed, and so that's okay. How do I get a past performance? How do I get one customer who can vouch for our capabilities to say it was valuable and it did what you said that it would do? So you get the pump primed, and then you figure out, okay, how do I take this to market? How do I get this, productized, if you will? And by productized, you got to think about it holistically. It's not just about the software or the technology you're delivering. It's about the whole product, which includes hosting and includes security, so that when customers come to you, that's one of the first questions that customers will ask us, or prospects will ask us, is how do I get to you? Before we even talk about your solution, how do I get to you? What level of security do you have in your system? Okay, now we can have a conversation, right? So it's that first phase, and then when you get into the second phase, now you get into the scaling phase. Okay, then you have to go through the process of getting sustainable, repeatable contracts. If you've done your due diligence correctly and working like a vendor like you guys, then you have the answer in terms of the hosting and the accreditation, because you've already potentially started those pipeline processes.
Yep.
So you have that answered, and that's typically going to be a longer pole than contracting. But contracting's still out there as a pretty long pole. I mean, typically what most agencies will do is get on the GSA schedule. I mean, GSA has fired a lot of their contract people, so the backlog is tremendous, right?
It's huge. Yeah.
So that's a pretty big impediment. But let's assume that you solve those problems. Now you're off to the races, and then you can, I think, take over like a traditional commercial software company approaching the commercial market can take over, and then you can scale.
Yeah.
Right. And then at that point, I would say it really comes down to channels, partners, and hiring the right people.
Yeah. I think that's also the valley of death term gets thrown around a lot. And for a lot of these early stage software companies or venture-backed software companies, even some of the hardware companies, you can build a really great business for the first couple of years on SIBRs, on OTAs, on prototype awards. But at the end of the day, that's all R&D dollars.
Yep.
And I don't think you've really gotten across the valley of death until you have a requirements line item, and there are program dollars and there are O&M dollars tied to your solution. I think that gets lost a lot, and I also see a lot of folks put those expectations on the sales folks as well. I think that's really an executive leadership, sales leadership responsibility to ensure the conditions are set for the sales folks to then go be successful.
Right.
And I don't think a lot of sales folks maybe quite realize that, and that's why the joke exists. The best jokes are rooted in truth.
Yeah.
Don't be the first guy in Fed
Right.
at a software company. It's because you probably didn't actually do your diligence on that company.
Right.
You didn't find out do they have a pathway to accreditation?
Right.
Do they have a version that can be delivered to the government? Do they have a contracting pathway?
Right.
Do they have a VAR distributor? Is all the infrastructure in place for you actually to go get in the room, deliver a capability to a customer, and then sell?
Yeah, and the good salespeople are asking all those questions in their interview, and when they hear bad answers, they're not taking the job.
They're not taking that job.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's another aspect of this, which is, are you selling a project? Is it going to be a science project? Is it going to be a one-off? Or are you trying to acquire a customer that you have a long-term enduring relationship with?
Yeah.
And if you're in SaaS, generally that long-term enduring relationship is what you're angling for.
That is the value. Yes.
Yeah, and I think positioning your company, arming your salespeople with how to sell, making sure that you're setting up your ideal customer profile correctly, and you're not bringing on customers that are going to churn out because they're not a good fit for your product and so forth. I think those are all things that I think are well-established processes in the commercial marketplace. But the challenge is, when you're shifting, you talk about the valley of death. It's like, okay, well, you're in this phase one where you're trying to get your first customer, and you're willing to open up the aperture of your customer.
Yeah, you'll
profile.
take some risk.
You'll take some risk, right? But then it's really in that shift into that next phase. Then you have to figure out, okay, how do we create a sustainable engine, sustainable revenues, potentially be profitable? Imagine that, and and so you can build a sustainable business. And everybody in the organization really needs to be bought into that model. And so if you got sales guys want to make money, right? And so
coin operated,
coin operated in a lot of cases. And what we found, and we learned this later than we would have liked to, is really finding mission-oriented salespeople for that next phase of your evolution is really important, right? I mean, we're both sales guys. We like making money, but at the end of the day, you're mission-oriented. There's something larger than making money for you, as there 100%. Is for me, and it's about solving this seemingly impossible problem, right? That you guys are delivering, and for us, the same, right? I mean, our biggest competitor is the status quo. And not doing something different or taking too much risk. The government doesn't like to take risks in general, right? And so when you have mission-oriented people, we hire from the service academies. We hire people that we don't have to train on their on the vertical or on the domain. We bring some folks that have been ex-comptrollers and planners. That are planning, the next weapon system. So we bring those guys on. We don't have to train them on those domains. All we have to train them on is decision lens, and their mission focus, and they feel like they can provide a lot more value from the outside because they can do one-to-many versus be pigeonholed in one area and give back to the government, right? So I think that's a really critical part of, it's acknowledging where you are in the evolution. Are you in the first phase where you might be willing to take on more risk? But then when you get to that next phase and you want to get to sort of that commercialization of your capability, you've already gotten past product market fit, but now you got to scale it. You got to run the company differently. You got to have different people in a lot of cases.
Yes. Yeah, you have to be intellectually honest about the stage that your company and your product is in. We've talked about this before, I think, on the podcast, but especially in a high-growth software company, if you're doing your job right, every 6 to 9 months, you're actually a different business. And you're a different product because you're hopefully improving at that pace as well. You need different talent. You need different people to execute against that.
That's right.
So like on that topic which is a topic near and dear to both of our hearts, hiring and growing go-to-market teams. Do you approach it from, you talked about verticals, so there's kind of the top-down approach to hiring go-to-market teams of, this is the vertical we're going after. Let's say we've had success in the department, we've had success in a couple of federal civilian agencies, but we want to make a big push into FedCiv, or make a big push into state and local. Do you go kind of top down, or do you go bottom up on, hey, these are talented people, these are former comptrollers, these are former planners, these are former PEO bodies, they know the end user pain point, and then we can kind of connect the dots through. Is it a mix of both? How have you kind of approached that?
Yeah, I think it really depends as well. There's sort of a phase of the portfolio that you're dealing with, or the territory that you're dealing with. And we have different levels of maturity across our territories. And so I think you take a different approach based upon that level of maturity. And so if you're just priming the pump for a territory, maybe you have a customer or you don't have any customers, you're going to potentially bring on somebody like a comptroller that understands the domain, that can connect the dots strategically and build the pipeline and build, start to get some customers on board, and then start to kind of, use the analogy again, prime the pump to then create that sustainable spin wheel, right? And so so that might be for an early stage portfolio, but for the later stage portfolios where you have a large amount of recurring revenue, you've got existing customers that serve as references, that's a different model. And so
farming versus hunting, right? Farming
versus hunting to some degree, but I would say there's always some combination of farming and hunting in every portfolio. And I think we are transforming our sales organization to be a little bit more aligned with a full customer journey life cycle, right? From hi, hello, here's decision lens, to through onboarding and on into year 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's a life cycle that sort of is a closed loop, right?
Yep.
And so the sales team and the company can learn from customers where the product gaps and other areas that we can drive efficiencies. The product team can learn from the sales team in terms of what are customers looking for, and they can start to see trends and so forth. And so for the most mature portfolios, what we've decided directionally is that we're going to concentrate resources, right? And we're
Yep.
going to put resources within what we call a pod, and we're going to have a general manager manage that pod, and they're going to be sort of the air traffic controller to work with the salespeople and the account managers and the delivery people to have one cohesive experience from the sales side to the delivery side and back.
Yep.
And making sure you're bringing on the right talent to be able to do all those things. You can get greater efficiencies, right? You can have people that are in delivery that are also looking for new opportunities. You can have people that are renewing that are acting like farmers,
Yep.
right? You can have your traditional hunters, and you can bring them all together, and depending on the current situation on the ground, maybe you have a customer that's at risk. You can be sending some of the sales guys in conjunction with the account managers to those customers and so forth to triage and to figure out how to right the ship. So there's a lot of different flexibility, but we would never apply that to a nascent portfolio, because in that sense it's better to have matrix resources and to have a little bit more of a sort of special forces approach to prep the battlefield.
Yep.
Before you take on a more mature approach.
Decentralized speed. How do you assess for the talent to kind of lead and run those teams?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, not an expert. Have had a few bruises over the years. But,
Yep, same.
I think historically we have gone out. There's a large number of salespeople in the DC area, and we've focused. Pre-COVID, we focused on hiring DC focused resources that would be able to go to the Pentagon and other places around this geographic area.
Yep.
We'd go out and we'd hire folks from big software companies that sold big deals, and were very successful in those arenas. And they were selling sophisticated solution sets in some cases, right?
Yeah, true enterprise sales
True
folks.
enterprise sales folks. But that didn't always translate, and I think there was a few reasons why. I think one, at these large software companies, you have armies of people that follow along with you, right? And we're a small company relative to the Microsofts and the Oracles of the world, and so everybody in our organization is an entrepreneur, right? You got to wear multiple hats. You got to go to where the ball's going, et cetera, or the puck, given your hockey thing, right? And so that's a different kind of persona,
Yes.
right? To have that entrepreneurial problem solver persona that is going to identify the problem and try and solve it, and they might not be able to do it all by themselves, but they can at least be the quarterback of that process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I think, a lesson learned that we picked up on some years back. But as I mentioned earlier, then finding the mission-oriented folks in that smaller subset, right? So
Yes.
you find the folks that can do that entrepreneurial exercise, but then they're mission focused. They have patience. We have pretty short sales cycles at Decision Lens relative to most sales cycles in this arena. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're selling at one of the big SIs, we're talking about 2 to 3 year competitive life cycle, right?
Yep.
Ours are, in many cases less than a year. Sometimes we can get deals done in weeks from hello to
It's incredible.
to contracting. But the patience that our business developers and our company needs to have in terms of there's only so much that our people can do to push the government forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having that patient mindset, but also having a high tempo, and pushing the government to
It's
do
a paradox
more.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pushing the government to do more in order to meet their mission. It's like it's a delicate balance, right?
Yep.
And so those are special people. There's not a lot of them, but we've been very fortunate to be able to find a lot of them coming out of the military, a lot of them coming out of the service academies, and the federal government that they don't have to be trained on on mission orientation. They don't have to be trained on their domain. In some cases, the planning, programming, budgeting, execution space that we play in, we don't have to train them on that. We just have to train them on decision lens. And we're actually willing to take people that have no experience in the real world and no sales experience. And that's pretty daunting for a lot of companies, right? Because as you well know, sales is a learned discipline. It's a science and an art. It takes a while to figure out how to work the art of sales, right? But that's something that I think we haven't mastered, but we're getting better at sort of how do you train people on the science? How do you do hand holding that kind of allows them to learn the art rapidly? And we've got mechanisms in place to have fail-safe measures to make sure that we're not losing contracts or doing other things. But we've been, it's I tell you, I mean, you're a West Point grad. I mean, these academies train folks well to be entrepreneurial, to have high tempo, and be mission oriented, and that's really kind of worked very well for us.
Yeah, I think the process power is such a key piece of. And I don't think any startup has this figured out, or frankly, any small business has this like really mastered. But the ability to bring folks in off the street with no sales experience, no product experience, and get them to production for the business in a short amount of time is an absolute superpower.
Yep.
Like it's a dragon that we're all chasing as businesses. But on the mission-centric piece, we do the same thing when we're looking for not just salespeople, but I think almost any position at our company, especially at Second Front, the mission orientation is so critical.
Yep.
Because it also checks the box on, do you have the intangibles? Like the things that I cannot or likely will not teach you in this role, do you already have those?
Yeah.
We can teach you the rest.
Right.
I can teach you about Game Warden. I can teach you about Decision Lens and all of our other customers on the platform. I can even teach you about the government agencies and how these networks operate and what the ATO process really is, but I can't teach you the absolute obsession with the mission and the obsession with the customer.
Right.
Because for us, the customer is the mission. We only exist to deliver capabilities like yourselves to the end user. And if that is not evident on day one or in the interview cycle, they're probably not the right fit for the team.
Right.
So kind of getting into now the future, you guys have been all over PPBE processes, financial planning and management, but the magic and maybe the double-edged sword of a powerful technology is you can address many use cases,
Right.
especially with a technology like yours. What does the future of Decision Lens look like? What are the big opportunities for growth, the big opportunities for, and maybe more importantly, mission impact, especially as we have a new administration coming in? I think there's a renewed focus and energy around not just the department, that's probably like the smaller egg in the basket of federal government expenditures and where we can get efficiencies, but what does that future look like for you guys? Where are you placing some bets that might be big?
Yeah, good question. So, suffice to say, it's an exciting time to be a nimble technology provider.
Yes.
Coming into this new administration.
I mean, even look at the market for software and defense just 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, it did not look like this.
Right. And, there's, I think everybody can acknowledge there's an unsustainable trajectory with our federal debt, with the misalignment of resources against mission, and those sorts of things. And so we feel like we're the right capability at the right time to help the government sort of surface those opportunities for rationalization or efficiency gains or cost savings. Imagine that the government would look at financial ROI. That's I think something that you think about the DOGE committee. I mean, Vivek and Elon and others. I mean, they're trying to apply best practices from commercial into federal.
Yeah, zero-based budgeting.
Yeah,
let's do this from the bottom.
Zero-based budgeting, easier said than done. But but we think we're in the right place at the right time. And just to kind of zoom out a little bit, what do we do? What's the problem that we're solving? We help federal agencies understand what's most important. So we help them automate that prioritization process, and it could be projects, capabilities, it could be facilities, and then we help them take finite resources, people, money, time, and apply those resources intelligently against those priorities. Now, easier said than done. It's like better, faster, cheaper. Pick two. We
Yeah.
have a proprietary framework called value, cost, risk, and balance. And most agencies cannot deliver high value, low cost, low risk, and great equity or balance across their portfolios. They've got to trade those factors
impossible.
off.
Yeah.
Right. And so what Decision Lens does is it takes relevant data elements, it brings it into the software, and based upon the context and situation on the ground, it allows them to automatically trade those factors off. Maybe you took a 10% budget cut. So are you willing to accept more risk? Are we dropping value down? Maybe we need to drive risk down on cybersecurity initiatives. How are we going to do that over time? What are the initiatives that we're going to add money to and maybe take other funding away from other projects, right?
Yep.
So having that visibility in that last mile of the decision-making highway, so to speak, is something that has been vexing for a lot of agencies. And and we're not a panacea for this challenge. There's a much larger challenge, which is predicated upon the immense scale of the government. I mean, the government has, between federal, civilian, and DoD, close to 6 million people. That's bigger than Amazon and Walmart combined, right? And so the scale is tremendous, the complexity is tremendous, the siloing of data across all those different mission sets and within divisions of those mission sets is significant, so much so that, it's very difficult to figure out what the government's buying. I mean, look at the failed DoD audits and so forth, or how do we ensure mission alignment in all the money that we're spending and the resources that we're applying? How do we ensure that? And so I think there's a tremendous challenge out there for the right vendors to be able to take a bite out of the elephant, one piece at a time, right? I mean, boiling the ocean, taking a hatchet and trying to solve this problem is going to cause more harm than good, right? I like the term scalpel, right? If they can use the proper scalpels, and I want to go back to something you said earlier, right? In terms of hiring, it's important to hire the right people because there's a time element, there's a time to value element, right? So the
Yep.
right solutions that are going to be able to support this next administration are going to have quick time to value.
Yeah.
So that's why our partnership's really critical, right? So we don't want to worry about the table stakes. We want to go to various agencies to show them how our capability is a better way, it's a more efficient way, and we can help be a partner in helping to drive transparency and visibility into their environments, into their ability to align with their missions and so forth. And the impact is tremendous at scale, right? I mean, you think about it, it's making sure that taxpayers' money is going in the right places, making sure that veterans can get their benefits faster, making
Yep.
sure that warfighters get their capabilities faster. And so, we think that we can be a material part of that puzzle that the next administration is going to try and solve. But I think it has to be done. It has to be done quickly, but it has to be done judiciously, right?
Yeah.
So
if I hear that right, with Decision Lens, the Pentagon can pass an audit.
I'm not going to promise that right away. But can we be part of the solution? Yes,
100%.
Because part of this is identifying the data that's required to answer specific questions. So if the question is, where are all my assets, right? There's great tools out there that are AI oriented that can do some smart scanning and pattern matching to connect material and other sorts of physical things with other sorts of logical things. And so there's good tools out there. But then you still have to be able to allow business people and other sorts of analysts that aren't down in the weeds to be able to make sense of all that data, right?
Yep.
And then you need to allow a decision maker to be able to press a button to say, we're going to do this or we're going to do that based upon the information that I have. And historically, these key leaders are making decisions in the dark, reflexively, more emotionally, without the requisite data, right?
Yep.
And so I think there's an industry that needs to come to the table, and it's the data management folks, it's the AI vendors, it's the integrated planning capabilities like Decision Lens that can work together to help carry that lantern in these very dark silos and to allow them to connect together. I think there's a mandate though that has to come from above, which is we're okay with transparency and we need to be transparent. And,
this is a good thing.
And we need to have proper planning outside of these more technical disciplines of asset management and cybersecurity and so forth. Planning has often been sort of a redheaded stepchild in a lot of agencies, right? It's like, okay, so we took a 10% budget cut, so okay, team, go pull some data from our authoritative data source to figure out where we can, afford that cut, and come back to me. And before they come back, the leaders already had to make a decision. So this process,
it's always in a negative context too.
Right. It needs to be a continuous process. It needs to be embedded into the fabric of their governance and existing processes, so that when curveballs are thrown, when questions are asked, they can go back to their planning environment and they can ask the question and get an answer, right? And they can trust that the answers are rooted in ground level facts, because the data that's coming in is the real data, it's kept up to date and so forth. So again, can't boil the ocean. We can't bring all the data in at once. It's the data that we can trust and will gain integrity and precision over time when we ask those questions.
Yeah. Last question I'll ask before we wrap it up. 9 years ago, you're talking to a younger Ted Reynolds as he comes into Decision Lens. What advice would you give your younger, greener self before you kind of went down this journey?
Boy, that's a good question. Wow. Man, I'd say don't overcomplicate things. Have a bias for imperfect action.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really critical, because again, it goes back to time to value, and you think about it as a hierarchy, right? Our end customers need to deliver value quickly. We can help them get to value quickly. Our teams have to deliver our capabilities quickly to our customers, and our employees have to, as a part of the overall engine, have to in an entrepreneurial way, have to be able to deliver their value to the system quickly, not irresponsibly, but quickly enough to the point where they can map to the cadence of the problem at hand.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Very well said.
So I would say that is probably one of the things that I've really honed over time in terms of a guiding principle, and we try and make sure that our teams are abiding by that principle. Outside of that, it's about tempo, like having the energy, hiring the right people. Like I had mentioned earlier, we were hiring more coin-operated people before. Now we're hiring mission-operated people. So making sure that you have, as you said, the right people for the right stage in the evolution of your company that are going to be focused on the mission. It's a blessing when you don't have to think about anything else other than you're all marching towards the same target. So those are really the two things that come to my mind in terms of things that I've learned and really kind of move forward with as I continue with my career.
Very well said, sir. Well, thank you for joining the podcast with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was great.